All right, time now for a quick check of the markets this morning. Investors are waiting to see what happens with oil prices. They're also reacting to February's inflation report that came in with price increases as expected. Right now, the Dow is down about 326 points, a little over 0.5%.
Let's bring in geoeconomics correspondent Erin Delmore. Erin, let's start out with those inflation numbers, the CPI numbers that just came out that really gauge how prices now compared to a year ago. It came in as expected, showing a 2.4% increase. What does that tell you about spending in February and where we are in terms of prices?
Well, it tells you that prices are still elevated. You know, when we see numbers like a 2.4% increase year over year or 2.5 when we look at just the core numbers there, it's holding steady. It's certainly in line with what we saw from January and in line with expectations, but it's still above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. So we're seeing that prices are still elevated, especially in some categories. You know, shelter and services were up. Although if you really dig into the data here, something interesting about shelter, which is actually the biggest section, the biggest component of CPI, rent prices actually only increased about 0.1% between January and February, the smallest increase that we've seen since January 2021. So I'll be honest with you, you really have to get into the weeds here to find a storyline about this inflation report because we're not seeing a lot of change between January and February. But guys, all we have to do is look ahead. The big story is coming, and that's because the shock to energy prices weren't shown in February. That's before the conflict with Iran came into focus. So it's certainly the numbers that we're going to see coming up in the months to come that'll show a big shock.
Okay, so where did we see some of the biggest increases last month, Erin?
Yeah. So like I said, you know, you're looking at shelter, you're looking at services. I mean, if you look at some of the things that have gone down, though, which helps contribute to this storyline where we see prices holding steady between January and February, look at used cars, look at auto insurance, you know, those are ticking down slightly. And if we remember from just 6 months ago or into part of last year, they were some of the bigger components driving price increases. So again, when we talk about inflation, CPI, we're talking about rates of increase, and prices do generally go up over time. So we're looking for slowing rates of increase or smaller increases month over month. Now, you know, if we look at some of the things that are still elevated also, I want to mention apparel, because we often talk about tariffs and the impact that these global tariffs are having on the prices consumers here at home pay. Apparel is one of the most sensitive categories because so many of our goods are produced overseas. Apparel is still up. Food is still up too, and that's one of the ones that are hitting households all across the income spectrum here. Certainly, even if you constrain your spending in other categories, food increases are going to hit you hard. So to answer your question, Vlad, we're looking at food, we're looking at apparel, shelter, services. Certainly, some items are still elevated month over month and year over year, but we're seeing some decreases in the overall picture. When we look at the February data, we see it holding steady.
So, Erin, for people who have credit card balances, looking to take out a mortgage, car payments, all of this, it all comes down to interest rates. Does this number give any indication about whether the Fed might cut rates?
You know, the expectation this morning is that we're still looking at the next interest rate cut in September of this year. A report like this, what we just saw come out at 8:30 in the morning, didn't do a lot to move the needle on that calculation. If anything, when we see prices remaining somewhat stable, which is what we show between January and February, it makes it more likely that the Federal Reserve will take no action at all. And so that's why we see September as the target date for the next interest rate cut. But I can't overstate that all of this not only is likely to change, it's certain to, because of the shock to energy prices that we're seeing. And remember, energy, while it's one component of CPI and inflation, really feeds into other categories like transportation, shipping, and consumer goods.
All right, Erin Delmore, thank you so much.